Over the last year, I've devoted a lot of time to thinking about and following the movement that surrounds the John Collins Black There's Treasure Inside treasure hunt. And of course, I'm a participant observer, so while I watch and I learn and I look for opportunities to use it as a venue for talking about clear thinking and problem solving and decision making, I also try to test out my own thinking by working through clues and trying to come up with some possible solves and solutions. I've posted a number of videos about the treasure hunt. I did a psychological profile of John Collins Black, which I'm sure is maybe 25% accurate. I created a video that proposes a solution to the forest fen box based upon my thinking. I posted another video that is a potential solve for the past and future box. And in this video, what I wanted to do is to explain how I'm going about this treasure hunt, this particular game. How do I make sense of the clues? Now, I will say this, though. I'm going to give you the 4 main steps that I use to think through the clues that are provided and try to come up with some possible solves. But it's important to note that these really only apply to the smaller boxes. The larger box that has the lion's share of the treasure and where the clues can come from anywhere in the book, or at least especially the first chapters, the chapters leading up to the ones in the back of the book that are dedicated to the smaller boxes. I do believe that there's a different approach to that solve. And I'm working on that and thinking through some different possibilities. I have a number of theories that I'm considering and testing out a little bit, but I'm going to leave that aside. And so for this video, what I'm going to do is explain how I think about this. And if you really want to understand the rationale behind what I'm going to explain in this video, I encourage you to check out my other videos, especially go back to the older video where I do a profile of John Collins Black. It tells you how I'm thinking about him, how I'm trying to make sense of his mind. I really do believe that in any treasure hunt, that a wonderful way of getting some hints about how to find a treasure, how to solve a game, is to understand the mind of the game maker. Every game maker has some signature styles, and we'll notice this all over the place. If you like video games, if you like board games, it's pretty rare for someone to just design a game and it's one style and then all of a sudden they go to another game and it's a completely radically different style. Game designers in some ways are very much like filmmakers or authors or songwriters. You'll notice these signature features or traits of artists and creators. And I believe that's true with game design. So that's why I created the other video that's an amateur psychological profile of John Collins Black, because I wanted to take some time to understand the man behind the puzzle, the man behind the treasure hunt, and see if that might give me a sense of how I think he's likely to design clues and to design a treasure hunt. And I actually think that he's a very smart person, clearly, very creative individual, and I think that there's a level of simplicity to his design that many people are missing. Now, that's a theory. I could be completely mistaken. A lot of people are looking at really deep layers and lots of symbolism and other things of that sort, and it's clear that their solves are based upon their ideas of how a treasure hunt can and should be designed. And that's one of the dangers, that oftentimes when we are trying to solve a puzzle, we try to think about the puzzle as if we were the creators, as if we were the makers of the puzzle. The problem is we are not. We are the players in the game, and we want to take some time to step back and think about who is this game maker and how is he likely to create things. So I'll read one to you and then I'll comment on it. So after getting to know John Collins Black a little bit, thinking about him, learning about him from what he shares about himself in the book, the interviews, learning a little bit about his background, the things that are publicly available, reading his children's books, all of those types of things, I've come to a certain framework that I'm thinking he might be using, at least for the smaller boxes. So based upon that, I've come up with really 4 basic steps for how I'm thinking about possible solves. If you listen to these 4 and you think that they're completely inconsistent with how he's likely to think as a treasure hunt designer, then you're probably wise to ignore my other videos where I offer some solves, because they're probably entirely wrong. If, on the other hand, you think that there's a possibility that I'm right, that I have an accurate understanding of some of his creative tendencies, well, then maybe check out those other videos. So here we go. The first one is I start broad by identifying the chapter's overarching themes. When I'm looking at the chapters for the smaller boxes, it's a single chapter. I look at it, I read it 3, 4, 5, 6 times. I've read each of the single chapters a dozen or more times. And I look at it, the first read through, I just read it just to understand it. Same thing for a second and a third read. And then after that, I start asking the question, what are the dominant themes here? Or what are the prominent themes? And those are not necessarily the same thing. A dominant theme is not necessarily talked about throughout the chapter, but it's a really strong story. And it's a story that can serve as a linchpin for the other parts of the chapter. I start by making a list of the most dominant themes that seem to be appearing in that chapter, really strong themes. For example, if I'm looking at the past and future box, I notice that Ready Player One is a really strong narrative and seems to have the potential to be a centerpiece, a linchpin for the clue chain. And I will consider a number of those. So the first part is I look for the broad themes and I write them down and take notes about them. So I use that theme as a potential clue for the broad location. I'm working from a theory that John Collins Black is using pretty strong connections between themes and locations. So when I look at the strong themes, then I start to identify what are all of the possible relevant physical locations in the world, especially those that are more explicit, not just implied or symbolic. For example, when I'm in the chapter on the past and future box and I look at the theme of Ready Player One, I'm looking for locations that are explicitly stated in the book. I'm looking for something really concrete that's connected to that theme. And I will jot down all of those places where people lived, where they were born, where they came from, where they traveled to, different locations of that sort. I have the theme, and now I'm jotting down a list of all of the possible locations that have meaning or significance or relevance to that specific theme or story. And I do that for each and every theme in the chapter. That's what I've done. And that can get me to a region, to a trail, to a state, to a city. And in some of the chapters, there appears to be a pretty obvious one, even in the name of one trail, essentially. And the same thing for Forest Fen. The chapter itself begins to reveal that the broad region is the same broad region where the original Forest Fen box was hidden. So there's obviously a really clear theme. I can narrow it down. I try to narrow it down at least for multiple theories. I'm going to come up with multiple solves, not one, not get attached to one. I'm always trying to have more than one so I don't get emotionally attached to my favorite. I'm doing, say, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 at a time of locations, broad regions or locations that are relevant to each and every theme that I've identified. So I get that down. And then, only after that, do I start to build a list of all of the clues. After I've done step 1, I get to step 2. I basically generate a list of all of the clues with no sorting or ranking at all. I just list all of the potential clues that I can identify in that chapter. And they may be clues, they may not be clues, but things that capture my interest, that seem to be highlighted or noted. If it is a word scramble, all of the words that I can identify. If it's a cipher, the actual poem that is revealed, or sentence or clue that's revealed from the cipher. I'm using the past and future box, but this applies to all of the others as well. If there are stories that are told that seem to have some kind of significance, like, well, why did he tell this story? I jot it down, possible clue. And I just make a list of all of those possible clues. Then I use that clue list to generate candidate locations within the broader region. More specifically, I identify potential locations in that broad region where multiple clues in my large list overlap. This is not find some kind of clever match. I'm looking for convergence. I'm looking for physical locations within the broad regions that I have identified from step 1, physical locations that seem to be connected to those individual clues and are located in those regions. I start to look for that convergence. That's giving me some ideas for some possible narrowed down locations for a search. And then I go to step 3. From the full clue list, I isolate the most concrete clues. Even though I've used the large clue list and I've looked for convergences of multiple clues that could be tied to a physical location, for step 3, I go back to the list and I try to narrow it down and isolate the clues that seem to be most concrete, the least abstract. I'm looking for clues that don't lend themselves as easily to really clever symbolic meanings. Instead, I'm privileging those clues that have the potential to almost function like a directional arrow toward a more particular location. For example, in the past and future box, when I'm looking at the word search and I see a word like quarry, while it's possible that quarry could be related to some kind of myth or story or legend, there's a greater likelihood in my mind that quarry is giving me a hint that the treasure could be in or near an actual quarry, and that concrete clue is hidden and disguised a little bit amid all of the other clues. Not that the other clues are necessarily red herrings. I'm not convinced that John Collins Black uses a lot of intentional red herrings, but the concrete clues, that allows me to give it special attention. I give it a little bit of extra priority, and then I go back to that step 2. And looking at quarry, I will look at my broad region, my narrowed locations. For example, in the past and future box, my broad region, Ohio, and then I get to Columbus, Ohio, as I start narrowing things down. And then I see the word quarry and I start to ask the question, are there any quarries in or near Columbus, Ohio? And I asked that question. And then I began to do a search and try to identify all of the quarries in the state of Ohio that have public land. And so it meets the criteria of where the treasures could be hidden. Now I have a clue that I think is worth a little bit more investigation. I'll pause here a moment. Note that I'm doing this not for just one strand. I'm not just going down one rabbit hole. I have 5, 6, 7 possible themes, and then I have possible relevant locations or regions for each of those themes. And then underneath all of that, I have my long list of clues and convergences of clues that lend themselves toward a location within all of those different regions that I have above. So it's kind of a funnel. I'm working my way down. And then I'm privileging clues that seem to lend themselves toward being a directional arrow, and they have a potential to be more concrete. And now I'm getting to something that is a more narrow location that I should consider. That leads me to step 4. Once I have a particular location or a short list of candidates for each one, Then I loop back with the full clue list and I review each of those narrow locations using the longer list of clues to ask the question, how many of these clues fit this place? I'm essentially stress testing each candidate against the total evidence rather than cherry picking. And after I do that, I come up with a little bit of a rough draft, fake math. I will go back and I'll look at the themes and I will say to myself, what level of probability do I think there is that it is this theme? Going back to that first level, that first question. And then within that theme, what level of probability do I think it is one location over another? And what level of probability? And so you add those percentages together so that you might be 50% confident of a region, but by the time you add up all of those percentages, there's maybe a 10% chance that it's in this particular park. And I might have 8 or 10 of those locations. And if I have a location that holds up to 25% or 30%, that is a very promising candidate for boots on the ground or an exploration. 1 out of 4 in game theory and in probability, that's definitely worth a little bit of time and exploration. Now, what I'm not sure about, and this comes to the 5th level, is level 4 is about all that I can do from my home, from my couch, from my chair. But the next step then would be to determine which of those specific locations, after going through all these 4 steps, are worth a boots on the ground, where you actually go and check one of those places out. You keep your clue list. You do as much as you can to have it in the back of your mind. You come up with some search strategies using grid search methods. I have a couple of videos on grid search methods because I do believe it's true with almost every treasure hunt. Even if you have all the clues right, it's not like it's usually going to lead you to the exact 1 foot by 1 foot space where the box is located. It may actually lead you to a space that's 25 yards, 50 yards, 100 yards, or even broader than that. There has to be some kind of systematic method of scanning that whole section and doing it objectively. You can keep your eye out for potential clues to see if anything in that clue list points to a physical item, maybe a color or a landmark or a sign or something like that, because it's possible that John Collins Black used those as little signposts or milestones to let you know that you are close or you're going in the right direction. I'm not sure about that, but that could be useful. The reality is, though, if you have a good grid search method, once you start going through that short list of your narrow locations, you have a really good chance of discovering things. Grid searching is used to discover all sorts of things very consistently by professionals in different environments, even in high-stakes situations. It's quite effective, and I've been experimenting with it myself. I'm definitely no expert. But that's it. That is the broad method. I think it's that simple. And this is not a claim that John Collins Black is simple. In fact, some of the most amazing designs, great songs, great films, great books, great stories are simple, but they're also profound. And after you read it, even though it might have a level of simplicity, it's beautiful. And you appreciate the beauty of the simplicity. Simple does not mean easy in the way that I'm talking about it. I just mean that it doesn't have to have all of these broad, complex, ornate mysteries and myths. John Collins Black is very myth-informed, and so stories hold many clues, like the story of Ready Player One. But when it comes down to actually working toward trying to find a box, I'm standing by this. I think that the method that I have here has some promise. But when and if the first boxes are located, my theory will be tested, and we'll see if these methods are indeed useful or not.